Okay, some colleagues that didn't realize that this thing is being streamed on Twitch, so I just told them again. So, hello everyone to a pretty short tech talk about how to approach a problem as a developer. Because the reason for it is, well, if you get junior or entry-level developers from time to time, and they tend to always um, face a huge wall and point on when they should solve tasks where they have simply no idea what they are doing or how they should approach a problem or how they should solve a task. And then typically they ask their colleagues or me, and then we go to them, explain the problem in more detail, and give ideas on how to solve it. And sometimes I just do pair programming and so to find a solution and so on. But I bet every one of us in every developer was at that point where he said, well, or she said, or whatever, or they said, or they where they said, I have no idea what I'm doing and have no idea how to solve my problem. So it's pretty important to have some methods that help you solve your problems. And so this talk is especially for developers. But it might also help you with solving other problems, because the two methods I have helped me a lot of times to solve different kinds of problems when developing, and it could also help you when solving whatever types of problems. So the goal of this talk is simply to give us some methods on how to approach a problem in order to have an easier life when you, well, have no idea what to do again. So let's start. First of all, we are going to talk about an example task that we might need to solve. And then we talk about some steps we can do to solve it. One step is gaining more knowledge about your environment. Then I've called the methodology the writer to solve a problem, and another mythology the artist. I guess pair mob programming is known by everyone, and I hope at the end some of you are going to write their ideas of how to approach a problem into the chat, so we might learn a little bit more than only my personal mythologies to solve it. So let's imagine we get some product backlog items, some kind of task we have to solve. I haven't screenshotted every part of the task. You can scroll down in there, and there are more screenshots and details and use cases explained and so on. It's most of the time the entry point in something for you to work on, some kind of task. And our task wants us to provide the possibility to update some kind of configuration, and also we need to provide the possibility to fetch the configuration status. So we have a config, and inside the config we want to activate or deactivate two-factor authentication for a complete account or for a tenant. We call them tenants at work. And so a tenant can have multiple users. So when we reset this config option, we want to enforce it for all users. That's what this ticket wanted from us. So now we know, okay, we have more like three kind of acceptance criteria: set the configuration, get the configuration, and the third one is when the configuration is set, we have to update each user to set a two-factor authentication flag. So what is typically the first step I do when trying to now solve this task? Well, I would try to gain more knowledge. If this is a new topic for me, or a new field, or whatever, or I'm simply new to development or new to a company, the first step is always to gain more knowledge, understand your problem to find a good solution. The better your understanding of the problem, maybe the faster and easier it is for you to find a solution for your problem. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, do I know all components that are affected? Or there's a typo. You can keep all typos you find. So step one, ask yourself, do you know every component that is being affected. Now it might depend on what architecture solutions you might have. You might have some like a microservice based approach on your architecture and have like 1,000 services. In that case, you should try to find out what services are affected by this change. If you have a monolith approach on it, then you don't want to find out which services are affected. It's pretty easy. It's the one single monolith service, but you have to find out what packages or namespaces or whatever your programming language calls it is being affected. The next question you should ask yourself is, have I or my team solved a similar problem in the past? Important question because most of it or many problems occur in a slightly different shape. So if you have solved a similar problem in the past, you can ask maybe ask yourself, how have I solved this task 2 weeks ago? Or ask your teammates how they approached the similar task, or maybe just look into the code how it was solved. So if you have like in our example, we want to add a new config option, and when you add new features to your product, it happens more than one time in history, I guess, that you add a new config option. So it's so there might already be lots of examples or that you can use as blueprint on how to approach your problem, because you can more or less look at what you or yourself or your team has done in the past and just do it the same way as they have solved the problem. Yeah, by asking your teammates how they approach this problem, you gain free and fast knowledge. More or less takes like some minutes, and your teammates might be there and have explained to you everything they know about how they solved a similar solution in the past. And if you have done it in the past and someone might have run into some problems, well, you don't have to run into the same problems again if you just look up how it was done before, or ask your teammates how it was done before. Third question. Especially with distributed systems, or also, well, in every case, you want to understand your environment you're in. So you have to understand the affecting technologies. Like, are you using, yeah, what type of database are you using? If you need to use a database for your task, what kind of protocol are you using when communicating between services and so on? For example, are you doing REST APIs, or are you doing gRPC or whatever to communicate? So after you have identified all components or services that are part of your problem, after identifying or checking if a similar problem has already been solved, you should check if you have the enough knowledge to in all the affected technologies. If you find out, well, I have no idea how to write a Mongo database query, that's no problem. But then you should start on researching or learning, asking your colleagues, reading a book, whatever, to find out how you write a MongoDB query, and afterwards try to implement it. You can also learn how to write a MongoDB query while implementing it, but pitfalls again. You could write a no SQL injection prune statement or function or whatever. And so it really helps to understand technologies you're using. So now we have gained some knowledge about our problem, about the environment of our problem. Now we want to try to find a solution. So now we are there and sit there and still we have a huge role. And okay, I know which services I have to touch. I know I need to use MongoDB and the REST API and uh, yeah, how do I solve my problem now? I don't know. Okay, so a solution would be to what's helped me in the past, greatly helped me, and I have some examples for that, is to write down what I actually want to do. You can do this in different kinds, so it depends on what suits you the most. So you can just write down a simple list of steps inside an empty function in your code, and then say step 1 do this, step 2 do this, step 3 do this, and so on. you could write yourself a general to-do list, like, okay, make a call to the config service to set this thing, and make a call to the config service to fetch the config option, and so on and so on and so on. Write it to the database, blah blah blah, update users, blah. So you have a general to-do list as a result, and then you can just strike out or mark your things as done after you have worked on a single point. What I've also already have seen is paraphrasing the complete problem into your very own language. In software development teams, we try to use so-called ubiquitous language. So everyone should speak the very same language when you're talking about some features and so on. So you use the same vocabulary and so on. But it still might not be the language you understand the best. So if someone tells you to update a config option and blah 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 for tenant so and so, and it has to be two-factor authentication and this and that, and some user flags and enforcing stuff, take this and just paraphrase this into your very 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 own language. It can be bullshit language no one else understands. You can use fill words like stuff and shit and so on. The only important thing is that you understand it, and by paraphrasing the problem, you more or less learn again, gain a deeper understanding of the problem. So let's have a look at some examples. For example, we have a function which is called update config. It gets in some config option and can return an error if something goes wrong. Okay, that's nice. It returns nil by default, so the compiler doesn't scream in your face that the function should return an error. So we return nil, so just our function is clean. Compiler doesn't scream, and you have your head free to think about your first step, like send a request to the config service to set your new config option. Then step 2, and then I would approach it the following. It is exactly what I would do now, is implement a sending of a request to the config service. When this is done and works, I'd go to the next step and still keep the comments in the code. Then I go to the next step, write some code that fetches all users. And step 3, I'd write code that sets the flag, the two-factor authentication flag for each single user. When everything is done, I'd simply delete those comments again. And I'm happy with it. And you can do it more or less. You might don't want to implement it all in a single function. You might want to write multiple functions, then no problem. Then in this case here, call the function that sends the request, call the function that gets all users, call the function that sets the 2FA flag. And then you have also clean code because you followed the integration and operation segregation principle. So you don't mix up operations and integrations of other functions. So more or less it would be even a good case to write everything in its own functions in here again. So that's one example. And I only have this one as an example, but yeah, I guess you get the point. Either you write some notes in your code on what you have to do. You can use whatever notepad. You can write it down on a whiteboard. You can write it down on a piece of paper. It doesn't care. The writer is going to write down its problem in some form. Whatever form it is. Whatever form suits you best. The next one, the artist. I was really good at finding names. The artist, I call the artist because the artist visualizes their problem. This can be done also in several ways. You can grab a whiteboard, a piece of paper, whatever, or some online tool, and then just try to visualize your problem. Like you can create some really basic diagrams that just consist of some rectangles and lines and maybe a note here and there on what this means and what is going to happen. You could create complete UML diagrams or whatever. So whatever way helps you in visualizing the problem. Also is something I do often. For example, for this problem right here, I'd use draw.io and just create me some rectangles. Like I have a rectangle for my API, where the API client then calls a function, an endpoint, and tells me, oh, I want to update my config. or I want to fetch my config. And then the API needs to talk to our config service. The config service needs to talk to the MongoDB. And if setting the config is a success, we want to talk to our user service to set our two-factor authentication flag. And this visualization helps me to know, okay, I need to do this and that in this service. Then I have to write two functions in the config service to save and load the new config option. And then I have to write a function that talks to the user service that sets the 2FA two-factor authentication flag for each user. Can greatly help. It is even more helpful the more complex your problem is. So if you have a really complex tasking problem, you might not be done with 3 small rectangles and some explanations. You might end up with a huge diagram or so. So it really helps to visualize this stuff. Another form of visualization, as I said, you can do it more or less in a UML diagram way or so. I use plant UML to create sequence diagrams. Still the same example, we have an API client that talks to our API and says, well, set a config, then our API tells our config service to set the config service stores it into the database, returns a successful result, then the API fetches all users from the user service returns all users, and then we want to set the flag for each single user, so there's some kind of loop, so the API talks to the user service for each user and sets the flag, and after everything is done, the thing is done. Also, a totally valid way of visualizing your problems. So, same with the artist, it's the same as with the writer. It isn't important what kind of visualization you choose. You choose whatever visualization suits you best, and then it's a perfect visualization for you. Yeah. Helpful tools that I use because I don't really use paper for anything, and I still don't have a whiteboard in my home office here. I most of the time use Draw.io to create diagrams that look like this, and I use Plant UML to create sequence diagrams, and sometimes even other diagrams, because Plant UML uses a very simple markup language, a text-based language, to create those diagrams. So you write some text and an image is being generated. It's pretty fast and easy to use. Okay, so maybe you have written down your problem in a form of to-do list. Maybe you have also created a sequence diagram and you still have no idea how to implement it. Well, then a valid solution is still to simply ask your peers if they are in or up to mob or pair programming. So you come together at one computer, or you go to whatever Zoom, MS Teams, or whatsoever, share your screen, and then everyone throws in their ideas. Because multiple developer brains tend to be very efficient in finding good solutions. And I have until now not really seen in the work environment I'm in, not really seen in a case where mob or pair programming totally failed. So that most of the time works pretty well, and everyone who is participating is potentially learning something from everyone else who's participating. So, that were, the mob and pair programming one was a pretty short one, but I didn't know what else in examples I should have put in there. Do you, people in the chat, maybe have more ideas how you solve problems besides writing them, simply writing them down, or visualizing them? I know having an open discussion with a stream chat is pretty hard. So if no input comes, I'll just continue soon. Next time I'll play some jingle for the waiting time. You have to give people a minute, and then the music should play while you wait. Okay, if you for now don't have other ways of approaching the problem, you can of course still write me on. My team colleagues can just write me on Slack, and we can give us some ideas. Others can maybe just hit me up on Twitter or write a Twitch message, and we can collect more ideas that might help us to solve or approach problems in the future. And more or less, that's already basically it. So thank you for attending, everyone. Have a great day, and so on. Bye bye.